goal was to shoot it so that the head, the eye, the bill are all sharp.
Ducks. The thing I have to say with ducks is it's hard to get creative with ducks or waterfowl in general.
All right, and welcome to another episode of Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys. Really excited today because I've got a different genre that we've ever had on the show before. And I'm going to introduce in just a second our special guest, Michael Zeigler. He's an underwater photographer. So very different than what we've done in the past. And I'm really excited to this. If you've got questions, put them in the chat box. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel, if you're just tuning in for the first time, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel. And if you're watching now, like live, go ahead and like the video now, just so it's there and you don't forget, because I know you'll forget to do that. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to bring Mike onto the show right now. Mike, go ahead and say hi.
Hey guys, great to be here.
All right. And I've got Mike's website up. Let me pull this up. And as he's going through his bio, I'm going to scroll through this. But just real quickly, here's how I came across Mike. There was an episode that I'm going to link in the cards up top. So if you didn't see the episode with Matt Sullivan, it focused on reptile photography, but Matt is actually a super versatile photographer. He photographs a little bit of birds. He's not real good at it, but he tries. He's actually exceptional at reptiles. And then he also does underwater photography. And I think that's how he met Michael. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yep.
Yes.
And then from there, I said, I need a guest for the show, and I really want an underwater photographer because we've never done it before. I said, so can you recommend somebody who's got really good work and who's also pretty cool? So, Mike, you got a ringing endorsement because Matt said not only are you a really good photographer, but that you're a really good guy and that you'd be a really good guest on the show. So, without any further ado, Michael, go ahead and just tell us a little bit about where you live, how long you've been doing this, and how you got started.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. It's great to be here. I live in Southern California. I am originally from Michigan, but moved out here after paying my dues with those cold winters like 20 years ago. I've actually been out here in California longer than I was living in Michigan. Huntington Beach, to be exact. And I've been doing this, just did the math this morning, for about 11 years. My wife bought me an underwater housing for our small point and shoot for Christmas 2009. And I've been doing a lot of scuba diving. And I said, hey, I'm seeing some cool stuff down there. I want to try to maybe snap a couple photos of it. And then she surprised me with this housing. And that's how she created the monster that sits before you here today. I got hooked early, and I've been shooting kind of ever since. Fell in love with it hard.
Yeah, really impressive stuff. I'm scrolling through your underwater work now. Now, I just want to real quickly, just to show people a little bit more about, some of the other images you take. You do a little bit of landscape photography. Now, is that more just hobbyish, or do you have dedicated gear for that as well?
I have some dedicated gear. I've got, I invested in a nice tripod and a ball head, and I shoot the same Nikon D850 for landscape as I do use that underwater as well. And I just started shooting landscape, I want to say 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago to the day. Started in January of 2018.
Okay. And much different. Oh, go ahead.
No, and it's just, I got inspired by folks like yourself who shoot landscape and, wildlife, on YouTube. That's basically how I got inspired for those times to fill the gaps when I wasn't underwater. Right.
Yep. And I've got your wildlife work up now. You kind of dabble in this as well. Do you now, for the people that are, follow me, typically bird photographers are using the longest lenses possible. 400 to 600 is very typical. Do you own long lenses as well? Because I know underwater, you don't make housing for 600 millimeter f4s.
Correct. Yeah, being close is key underwater. So luckily we have the luxury on land to use longer lessons. So yeah, I do have a 200 to 500 f5.6 that I use with my Nikon D500 for wildlife. And most of those images you're showing there are on morning walks I take with my two young kids.
Okay. Yeah. With I'm going to flip over to the 10 images in just a second, but with underwater photography, let's use Nikon for example, because I'm familiar with that gear. is there a go-to body that most people use, or is it just whatever's available to you? In other words, do they make the accessories, which is very critical for underwater, much different than wildlife photographers? You've got to be able to find accessories and housing that will suit the body. So do they make that for everybody available, or is it just specific bodies?
I would say most bodies these days, and the technology just has taken off with mirrorless cameras, and frankly, I can't keep up with it. I invested in my D850 a couple of years ago, and I'm just hyper focused on that. But I do know they keep releasing new cameras. Basically every camera manufacturer under the sun, you could probably find a dedicated underwater housing for it. Now the ports we use, that goes in front of the lens that we use. Those can be interchangeable in most cases, depending on the housing manufacturer. But the housing itself has to be dedicated specifically to that camera body so that I can control virtually every single thing I can on land. I can do it underwater with the exception of changing lenses.
Okay. Do you have the housing there with you?
I do.
Yeah, I'm going to blow you up so that people can see this. This is what we talk about when you're talking about housing, right? This is a big piece of equipment.
Yep. Yeah, this has actually cost more than the camera itself.
So
you got to be all in.
People have no idea. My bird photography friends have no idea what this costs. Are we talking $500? Or are we talking $5,000?
So these housings go from anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 for an aluminum housing to specific for the D850, right? You can see there. And here's where the port attaches. So if I'm using a dome port for a wide angle lens or a flat port for a macro lens, I just attach it here before I go diving. Here's the back of the camera. You can see it looks very similar for those Nikon shooters out there. Canon looks similar, right? It matches the ergonomics and all the functionality of the camera body itself. So I can see the view. I can see the back of the screen here, and this is the viewfinder. This is what I use to look through the viewfinder. This is a 45-degree viewfinder, so I can look at it from a more comfortable angle. I prefer this. They also make straight viewfinders depending on your style of shooting, but it's just money. It's just money, right?
Yeah, I know it can get listened. Hang on one second. Okay.
Yeah.
Cameras can get expensive.
Yes.
But when you're talking about all this additional equipment and housing, really expensive.
Yeah, it's like, oh, you got the housing, great. Oh, you want lighting? Okay, well, hand over your first child. It's an investment that takes, at least for me, took several years.
Yeah.
Right. So.
All right.
Well worth it.
Let me pull up.
Okay.
Okay. I'm getting a little bit of reverb in my headphones. Hang on one second. Okay. Let me go ahead and pull up your 10 images, because this is really what this show was about. We wanted to look at 10 of the underwater images that you've brought. And I laid them out in a little bit of an order. So I tried to group some things. So this was my starter image. I don't know what kind of fish this is. So when you're out in the... I was going to ask you about that. So I know with bird photographers, it is very, very common that we get very hyper-focused on species. So we want to shoot this species because it's a rarity, or we want to shoot this species, or we've never shot that species before. Is that a thing for you, or is it a thing for some people that do underwater photography?
I would say it's a thing for most underwater photographers because they want to be able to get the image and then identify it. In my case, I prefer to have, let me back up. It's unusual for me to even start packing my gear and plan a trip without having an image of a particular species in mind. Okay, so for this particular trip, I knew I was going to shoot macro. I wanted to shoot an image of a blue-banded goby or a Catalina goby. These little fish are like an inch and a half long. They are almost everywhere at Catalina Island, which is about 30 miles offshore here in Southern California. Very, very, very common, which means you can take your time and get a shot that you want. But I had yet in my portfolio have a really what I consider to be an attractive portfolio or profile image of a portrait of a blue-banded goby. So I set out to do that. So I would say a vast majority of photographers know exactly what they're shooting.
Okay. So it's not as it sounds, when I always reference to what I reference, which is I know, birds and species and locations, and I assume it's got to be very similar to with underwater photography. In other words, if I go to this area, I should be able to get
Yep.
these types of species.
Correct. Yep,
Okay.
I knew exactly where to find these guys. A place called Bird Rock, 30 to 40 feet. Those rocky outcroppings. This one had a really nice, those lines in the back. I like to look for, because these guys are so ubiquitous, I like to look for the background first, as I
Yep.
often do when I'm shooting macro photography to get that nice, and a nice bokeh. That's a crowned urchin. So you've probably seen an urchin or enjoyed it for sushi.
Yep.
But those are the spikes of the urchin behind it. And these gobies have a habit of finding a perch they like, and then if they get spooked, they just kind of swim around for a little bit, and they will almost always come back to the same perch. So when I settled in near the ocean floor, the last thing I do is look at my dive computer. Okay, I've got 45 minutes of I call it my underwater studio time before I have to surface, and I just settled in and I dedicated myself to this particular image.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned backgrounds. It's such a big part of what I'm still getting an echo. Let me turn this off for a second. It's such a big part of what I do in my bird photography is often I'm looking for backgrounds first and everything else secondary.
Right. Yep. That's usually where I like to start with macro. I don't always have that luxury, but in this case I did.
Yep. All right, let's get into this next image. Now, this one was very specific. I kind of mixed up these 10 images, and we started with the little thing, the inch or two long fish, and now oh gosh, I'm going to mess this up. I say sea lion or seal. What am I looking at?
Right. It's a sea lion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a pair of California sea lions. Very, very, very common, especially at the island where that was shot. That was Santa Barbara Island, which is about 60 miles offshore. It's part of the Channel Islands National Park, and there's a rookery out there, one of the largest on the West Coast for California sea lions, and so they're very common. So this was part of a 2-day trip, and before I jump in the water, I like to have my strobes on. I turn my camera settings on. I always have my go-to settings for the conditions I think are going to be present right when I hop in the water, because that's often where you see critters who are coming to investigate. What's that weird, awkward critter that just hopped in the water? Let's go check it out. And that's usually when you'll see these things. So this pair of sea lions happened to come up to me at like 60 or 70 feet. And amazingly, that is the only time I saw sea lions in that entire 2-day trip.
Wow.
And this is part of one of the largest rookeries on the West Coast. So I'm lucky I had about 2 or 3 images in this brief encounter, and that was it. And luckily, this is one of my favorite images of sea lions that I have today.
And the pose is unbelievable.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. I have one in silhouette, one with just enough strobe light to make its face pop. And I was very, very happy that I had my settings that I did. I didn't have time to do anything except for basically point and shoot.
Yeah, unbeliable.
So always be ready.
Is
FHD
noise
there,
a problem shooting underwater?
No. In what do you mean?
Camera noise. So are you shooting high ISO?
Oh, I see. I rarely push it beyond ISO 800.
Okay.
To be honest with you. Okay. Yeah, because the water kind of acts as it's very buoyant, obviously, and although the camera is very heavy, maybe. Well, one of my ports alone is 12 pounds, but underwater, it's almost perfectly buoyant. So you can get away with really slow shutter speeds, if you're dealing with a static subject. The sea lions, I think I probably hopped in the water with 1/160th of a second, as it goes, or 1/125 maybe, and luckily that was just enough to freeze along with the strobe light to freeze that motion. But otherwise, you can get away with some pretty slow shutter speed. You can kind of keep that ISO down.
Okay. And how important are strobes?
Well, it depends on the type of photography you do, but for me, when I need them, I want them to be there and perform. And so the strobes I have the ability to rapid fire. They can almost keep up with I think, what does the D850 shoot, like 10 frames, 8 frames a second, 10 frames a second, something like that. It can basically keep up with that if the strobes are down around quarter power. So I get very fast recycle time. So if I'm shooting action, they can keep up. But yeah, quality of light. I mean, that's a whole other. We can have a whole other show about strobes and the different qualities and all that fun stuff. Price points. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna go on. Now, my mic has an echo, so I'm going to switch my mic source right now.
Okay.
While I'm doing that, though, if you could tell me this next one, it's like a manta ray or stingray.
Oh yeah, the bat ray. That is arguably the most successful image I had in social media. Fun fact, which kind of surprised me. I knew it was I consider a stunning image. I have a large print of this in my home, but I didn't think it was going to get as much love in social media land as it has. This is a very brief encounter, certainly one that I'll never forget. This is 2014. This is when the waters got really, really warm, and unfortunately, because of that, a lot of the kelp forests died off. But in that time frame, the water is really warm, which made it great to dive in, and it also was very, very clear. As you can see here, I'm probably at 70 feet below the surface, and it looks like I'm shooting in air.
Wow.
It's just unbelievable conditions. And I'd happened to see this bat ray swim over my shoulder the other way, and I froze, right? And I just stopped, and I waited, and I dialed in my settings, turned my strobes off, and hoped that it would circle back, and it did just that, and it literally flew right back over my head. I'm shooting a very wide fisheye here. Well, the fisheye is 180 degrees. So it's very close to me. I probably maybe 8 feet away. And so, luckily all the conditions lined up for this keeper.
Wow.
Yeah. And usually these bat rays are seen foraging on the ocean floor. Once in a while, you'll see them swimming through the kelp forest. So that in and of itself was kind of special, and to be able to shoot up at it and kind of get its underside too. And they kind of have a little bit of a smile to where their mouth is formed. So this kind of maybe adds to some of the charisma of this bat ray.
Yeah, really, really cool.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, let me get on to the next one. Now the next.
How's your mic doing?
It's terrible.
Oh no.
Yeah, I can't lie. Yeah, I don't know. It's never happened where I have this echo. So you're going to do a lot of talking, which is the point. I'm going to have this echo, I think, for the rest of the show. But
All right.
we're going to get into. I'm going to count this wildlife. Now these things don't move very fast.
Yeah.
Urchins and starfish.
Yeah, this was again Santa Barbara Island, arguably my favorite island of all the Channel Islands, and the surge, the motion of the ocean, if you will, this day was really strong. I think there was a swell coming in, a storm coming in, and that swell was just kind of whipping everything around underwater. On top of that, it was cloudy, and this was the first dive of the day. It was 8:45 in the morning. So I immediately thought slow shutter speed. Take advantage of the cloud cover, take advantage of the motion. Let's see if I can get some cool kind of effects. And this was one of the first times I'd played with that technique. And honestly, I couldn't be happier with it, Scott. It did take a lot of effort. I'm hanging on for dear life. My hand is grabbing onto a rock, just to the lower left of the frame. You can't see it, obviously. But I'm shooting at a shutter speed of 1/8 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Right, to get that kind of, and then I was able to use my strobes to kind of freeze and light up the two sea stars, the two bat stars, those are bat stars, and the crowned urchin, and part of that purple is coralline algae, and then some of the kelp froze as well. So, and then the rest of it, anything that wasn't hit by the strobe, you really see that motion. I was very, very pleased with this image. But yeah, it's kind of a fun technique when the sun isn't out and there's a lot of motion. So just kind of slow things down, see what you get.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about flash that a lot of people, they may or may not realize it if they don't use flash, but when you hit flash, it doesn't really matter. Your shutter speed's almost irrelevant.
Correct.
Yep, and the only thing that's going to capture is, like you said, what doesn't get hit by the flash may show the blur. So in this case, you've got a mix of frozen images from the flash, and then you've got that blur that people could see in the image, hopefully that comes through the video, but like that kelp is still moving.
That's correct. Yeah, I've got it on rear curtain sync on the Nikon. You can rear curtain sync, so the flash fires, the strobe fires at the end of the exposure. So the beginning of the exposure is all motion, and everything gets frozen right before that the shutter closes.
Super cool. Now,
Yeah,
humpback whale. I got it right.
yeah. You
And
did.
this had to be. Is this special? Like you see this and you're just like, okay, this is once in a lifetime, or is this something an underwater photographer sees once a year, or once every couple of years?
Every time I get in the water, these things.
No.
This was an unbelievable trip. Hopefully not once in a lifetime. I'd sure like to share this with my kids one day. This was a trip I took with my buddy Todd Winter. Shout out to Todd. He and I run immersed imaging. Todd's currently fighting cancer right now, but I know Todd and I are going to be back in the water together very soon. But Todd and I run some international workshops, and this one was to Tonga, and specifically to snorkel and free dive with humpback whales. And Scott, it was unbelievable, right? I took my housing. The nice thing about it, you can travel a little bit lighter, no strobes allowed, so it's all ambient light. I took one dome port I borrowed from Matt Sullivan, right? Shout out to Matt. So I got his high-end dome port, so I get the highest quality images possible. And yeah, we happened to hop in the water. This was first or second day, I think. These are two male humpbacks. They were competing for the female's attention, so it was a little bit. There was some rough action with the males. You can't really tell from this particular image, but the surface of the ocean was pretty rough. So we're all bobbing around, but, the main boat's maybe 50 feet away, and you kind of look under, and like everything underwater kind of stops, right? And you see this majestic creature before you. And just to give you an idea of the size, because I'm shooting a fisheye, it's hard to tell, but that whale's left pectoral fin sweeps across the front of the frame and comes maybe 2 feet in front of me.
Wow.
Right. So they're very close, very intelligent creatures. I'm sure he knew exactly kind of where I was and, relation to it. But yeah, I'll certainly never forget that. And the one in the background, the bubbles are from, it had just finished spy hopping, where they pop up to take a look around. Yep. And they drop down. And that's where those bubbles are coming from.
Very cool. We're going to try two things on the echo.
Okay. All right.
Mike, I'm going to ask you to turn your volume down on Skype a little bit. Somebody who apparently knows technology says that could be an issue. And then we may get feedback through your mic. So that could be potentially. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. How's that?
All right. That's perfect. I think we solved the issue.
Okay.
One thing it might have been. So one of the interesting things about this humpback I wanted to mention, and you mentioned proximity. Now, how big is a humpback whale?
Oh, geez.
Like, I mean, it's the size of a bus, right? Like bigger than a bus?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't give you specific. I mean, 30,
but
40 feet.
Are you
maybe?
scared this thing is going to swallow you? Like, if it opens its mouth.
I wish I would have seen that, but no. No.
No, okay.
Zero fear, zero trepidation. If anything, we were hesitant to get too close because the main goal, and there's no image here, I think there may be one on my website, was to interact with the females and their calves. Because usually you would have the primary subjects on this trip weren't the male, because usually they were tough to get in the water with because they're moving so fast. But it was to get an interaction with the calf and the mom, and the calf was learning how to hold its breath and would come up to the surface and kind of swim around the snorkelers. And what we were afraid of was getting too close, that the mom would kind of then kind of move and take off.
Okay.
So it was kind of the opposite. We want to make sure we kept our respectable distance.
This is an awe-inspiring image to me.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and it, you just got like I feel myself there, and I feel that light, that beautiful. And one of the things I love about underwater photography is you get these filtered beams of light that come through the water.
Yeah,
you don't get that. I mean, in a really weird day, sometimes in the woods, you'll get that filtered foggy light that streams in and you get these beams, but it seems to happen often in underwater photography because of, whatever the filtering, the particulates in there and the surface of the water. But man, what a magic moment.
Yeah, thank you. I hope to go
Yeah,
back
I'm just
soon.
staring at it, man. I'm just staring at it. I'm not gonna lie. I'm just staring at it like I do want to, by the way, if I ever get out there and I steal Matt Sullivan's gear, I do want to get into the water sometime. I think it would be unbelievable. Unfortunately, from what I hear, the East Coast is not like New Jersey's not the best place to do underwater photography. So,
It's not usually a destination, but they have some fantastic wrecks out there, from what I understand. I haven't enjoyed them, but I have heard that
okay.
there's some great wreck diving on the East Coast for sure. But yeah, if you ever come out, and I'll tell you this about Tonga, anyone can go, right? You don't have to be a photographer. My wife joined us. She was just happy to snorkel and just kind of be with them, enjoy
Hmm.
their presence. So I'll leave you with that.
Awesome. All right. This next one, these are, do you call them orca, killer whale?
Those are killer whales. Yeah,
Okay.
orca.
Is this now, is
Yeah,
there a,
arguably the most unforgettable interaction encounter with wildlife I've ever had.
and they travel
Very
in pods?
unexpected. What's that?
They travel in pods typically?
Yeah, from what I understand, I think there's different, subspecies of orcas. I haven't really studied them, and certainly this trip was not dedicated to seeing orcas. This was in the Solomon Islands, and from what I understand, orcas are very rarely seen there. This is my second trip there. Again, another immersed imaging workshop with Todd. This is a year ago, August, and I had just gotten back on the boat from a dive, stripped all my scuba gear off, but I still had my wetsuit, mask, snorkel still around my neck. And one of the crew members yells, "Orca." And I'm like, did he say orca? Kind of looked off the side of the boat and I see this, the male's telltale, pectoral fin come up to me, and I'm getting goosebumps now. I'm
I'm
like,
getting
oh my
goosebumps.
God, there's an orca, man. And there's a couple more of them behind him, and then somebody yells, "There's a baby," and I'm like, oh geez. So the host on the boat was like, let's go, let's get one of these little skiffs, or like these little aluminum, they call them tinnies, like these, little boats with little outboards. And I luckily had the camera and the lens and the port on that I needed for that shot. Complete luck. I could have come up and had a macro lens on and, gotten a great photo of a orca eyeball. But
Hmm.
luckily I had on the equipment that I needed, and all I had to do was grab my fins and a weight belt. And we hopped in there, and the whole ride out there, we're trying to catch up to them. So I'm thinking about what kind of engagement we're going to have, what settings I need to have, all the way down to remember to wipe the dome port after you hop in. Because when you hop in, there's bubbles on your dome port. And you take a shot through that, it's going to be, probably a ruined image. So, heart pounding through my chest. And the only thing that gave me the courage to hop in was reminding myself that there hasn't been any attacks on a human from an orca outside of captivity.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, well, we're cool. We're cool. Everybody's cool. So we got in position, and I slipped in as quietly as I could. I saw them coming basically right at me. The entire encounter, according to my metadata, lasted just 10 seconds.
Oh,
I
wow.
fired off 30 images. And the keeper was when the baby kind of did a little belly roll
Yep.
and kind of looked me in the eye, and then they took off underneath me. So
Well,
unforgettable.
just curiosity in this. What's your editing? So do you clean up images a lot? Do you have to with, I know somebody had mentioned with underwater photography, a lot of times you have to clean up particulates depending on where you're shooting, I guess.
Yeah, it's they call it backscatter, right? Typically,
Okay.
it is the particles in the water. If you're using strobes, if you light up the water between you and your subject, then that's all that particulate's gonna show up in your image. To be honest with you, just as a general statement, if I'm spending more than 5 minutes editing an image, then I didn't get the image. Right?
Okay.
That's
So
kind
what
of
you're
like
saying is
my
I've never gotten a good image. You're telling me because because
maybe I'm
I
just
will say
lazy.
my work, I think because birds have a lot of branches in them that I kind of like to get out sometimes.
Yeah,
I will tell you, I
yeah,
think
but
most of
there
my
are
edits are
ways
about
around.
10 to 15.
But yeah, there are ways around, positioning your strobes, et cetera, to kind of minimize, backscatter. Sure, in open ocean, especially with the whales in Tonga, there's a lot of particulate in the water, so I had to pick through that. Very rarely do I pull an image into Photoshop to touch it up. but in this case, I had to white balance the image. Maybe I picked out, I made the blacks kind of pop a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe some structural clarity detail in the whales themselves. But that's about it.
Okay, so mostly just touch-ups in Lightroom and let's go.
Yeah.
Awesome. This one I love. This is another one of those kind of kelpy scenes. I don't know how large these fish is, and one of the things that I always struggle with underwater photography is a lot of times when you're using these wide-angle lenses,
Oh yeah.
it's hard to tell scale or size of the fish. And I think it's just me because I'm not used to seeing it. We're used to looking at, long lens images, which are very flat and they don't have this kind of distortion in the shape where the heads are bigger than the tail. You get that fall off.
Yeah.
So what am I looking at here?
So this is a male sheephead, very, very common fish. You usually don't see him this big, and this guy is probably 2.5 or 3 feet, a big guy. Gnarly teeth. They're just kind of they'll get really close up to you. They look very intimidating with those teeth, but they're not going to bother you unless you're carrying around a bag of scallops or something.
Okay.
But this particular image was shot with a rectilinear lens, which is usually not my go-to. Usually, if I'm shooting wide, I'm shooting a fisheye, and that's to keep the kelp nice and straight. And it's a 16 to 35, and I'm at 22.
Okay.
For the viewers at home, right? I'm not using strobes. I'm using something called a magic filter, which is a filter that was created by arguably the generation's most famous underwater photographer, Alex Mustard. And so Alex created these filters that you have to white balance underwater at the depth you're at, and then it creates these very realistic images where the color penetration is very deep in the image, something that you probably wouldn't be able to create by white balancing alone.
Okay.
So I went out to experiment with this, and luckily I had this encounter with this male sheephead.
Very cool.
I really enjoy this image. Just the way it's basically right on top of me. So I'm shooting almost straight up.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's interesting too is the way, as you're looking up into that kelp, it provides a whole dimension. You get this whole sense of, and these lines that are created with the kelp, really, really cool. I love putting my birds in habitat. I think it offers a real perspective to where they live and how they operate day to day. I think this one does that same sort of thing where it kind of feels like this might be where this fish hangs out. This is where it likes to be. It doesn't like to be in the open spaces. I don't even know if this is true, but that's what I get when I look at the image.
I appreciate that because I do strive to provide the viewer with a sense of environment, right? Where is this thing living, and what's it like to be down there at that depth? And that's one reason I like to shoot fisheyes a lot, is because you get that massive field of view to show you basically from the ocean floor all the way to the surface of the ocean. I think that's what makes a successful underwater image for wide angle specifically, is being able to see all the way up to the surface or near it.
And somebody asked what depth. Now, I don't know if you know the depth of this, but what is a typical depth for underwater photography? And is there a limit to how deep you can go, or does that depend on where you're at and how clear the water is? Or do you just run out of light at some point and your strobes aren't enough?
Right. So this particular image, I'm probably 25 feet deep, maybe 30. If you're a beginning scuba diver, you're limited to, 60 feet, right? If you get your advanced certification, it's down to 130 feet. The deepest I've ever gone was 150. And I very rarely go below 100. And to be honest with you, I usually go where the light is best. So if I have a subject in mind, let's say it's a macro subject, that's one exception. If I know there's, specific fish that lives only at 90 feet, which they do exist, you go down to 90 feet and that's where you plan on spending your dive, albeit it's going to be a shorter dive because you're deeper. But for the most part, I probably hang out, 30, 40, 50 feet.
Okay. And how long do you stay? You said 45 minutes at some point earlier. Is that a typical duration?
Oh, my bottom times are usually around an hour.
Okay.
I dive bigger tanks. We can get into the specifics, but I dive a mix of air that's enriched with oxygen, so I can stay down deeper a little bit longer. Because again, I've invested in all this equipment. I've invested in all the gear for diving. I've invested time away from my family, and the trips and travel and all that fun stuff.
Hmm.
So I want to basically what I'm trying to get at is I maximize the time I have to shoot and create images underwater.
And will you go more than one time? Will you dive multiple times in a day if you're on a trip?
Oh
That's
yeah,
common.
so if I'm on a liveaboard, let's say I'm in the Solomon Islands, I'll probably dive 3, 4 times a day at
Oh
least.
wow. Okay.
Yeah, get in,
And
eat, sleep, dive, repeat.
is there any danger in scuba diving other than the obvious, like tank fails or you get caught on something underwater? I mean, is
I wouldn't say anything that other than the obvious. I mean, if you're trained by a reputable organization, they'll teach you all the pitfalls and what to look
okay.
out for. You know,
All right. Yeah,
safety
I've
is
done
number
some.
one.
I've scuba dived twice in my life. I was a young kid in Hawaii. We were on a family vacation, and I got to tell you, I went out the first time, and I said, "Dad, I got to do it again." And the second time we
Yeah,
went under, it was amazing, and I saw this sea turtle, and I'll never forget it. Like I mean, just and I listen. I don't know if that's a dime a dozen for an underwater photographer, but to see this massive thing swim right past you as a 15-year-old
yeah,
kid, you know, it's one of those. It's just one of those memories I'll never forget. So really, really cool.
unforgettable, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's get on to this next image. This one is neat. It's got a diver in the background. I love this. So this may be a wreck. It looks like a man-made structure, or it could just be some kind of industrial structure underwater, but it looks like maybe a wreck. And then you've got this growth of coral. So you've got one of those interesting dichotomies between this man-made structure with, you know, angular lines, and then you've got this patch of new growth that's very vibrant in color. I think it's
Yeah.
and I'm guessing I'm getting in your head a little bit that maybe that was part of the image, that there was this contrast between this man-made structure and then this beautiful vibrant growth that is really well lit and stands out.
Well, thank you. Yeah, this is well, you checked all the boxes in terms of what that is. We're looking at an active oil rig platform off the coast of Southern California. For those of you who have been here or know, you can look at it at night. You can see them all lit up, and there are a handful of platforms that divers can visit. And I would say second to Santa Barbara Island, the oil rigs are my favorite place to dive because you never know what you're gonna encounter. I mean, this particular platform is called Eureka. It's in 700 feet of seawater. And this particular image, for those of you locally who want to find these structures, and they're there obviously all the time, 60 feet of water on the northeast side of this structure. You go down, and if you're swimming up to it, Scott, you can't tell that there's any like colorful growth because you're 60 feet down.
Hmm.
This was 11 in the morning, and maybe it was cloudy. There's not. It depends on the visibility too. It doesn't look like the viz was that great that day, but it wasn't until I took a test shot and I saw the colors pop, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then I saw the Garibaldi. That's that orange fish. That's the California state marine fish.
Okay.
Kind of front and center, and I'm like, this is amazing. Let me just dial in my lighting. It took me a few minutes to make sure everything was evenly lit, and then it just so happens that my dive buddy Lisa, hi Lisa, she's swimming by, and I'm like, this is perfect. So I gave her like a high sign. Hang on a sec, I'm going to take your picture. Just hold the pattern. Hold your pattern right there. And as soon as I had everything lined up, the Garibaldi just turned almost on cue, and I was able to get the image. So this one's certainly special to me and stands out as maybe one of my all-time favorite oil rig images.
Yeah, beautiful. Really love the colors in that. Yeah. I saw a couple comments in here just about it's got to be really interesting. Like you said, you're down 60 feet. Things are probably looking pretty murky. And then you see these colors and all this life that's there that probably doesn't really show itself until you put some light on it. And then you're like, oh my God, like this is really here. Like this is wow.
It's almost meditative because I was so hyper focused on the image and reviewing my result, looking at the viewfinder and just getting dialed things in. And then you're in the flow, right? And I'm sure you know what that, feels like.
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of snap out of it and you're like, okay, I'm 60 feet underwater. Let me see what's behind me, just to kind of take a glance around and kind of reacquaint yourself with your surroundings. But it really is easy to get lost in the process.
Yeah. Let me pull up this next one. This is a little bit reminiscent of that sheep head image. that kelp, you have that same look. Is this the same lens setup? Looks similar. I don't know what this fish is, so I apologize.
Well, you got it right. It's a sheephead.
Oh, okay. Now, why
Yeah,
does this one look different than the
this
other
is
one?
a female sheephead.
There you go. Okay.
They transition. They're all born female. Fun fact: this is a wrasse species, and they all are born female. And when a dominant male leaves the area, then one or several of the females start to make the transition into a male. And you can see that telltale white chin on this particular female, and a little bit of the starting to get the black stripes on the side. Anyway, yeah, this is definitely not the same trip, but at Santa Barbara Island, same island as the other image. And this is with a fisheye. And again, I'm maybe a foot, maybe 2 feet away from the roots of the holdfasts of the kelp. And in order to get it lit up, because that algae, that giant kelp, really absorbs a lot of light. So you have to kind of turn your strobes way up in order to get, some color in the kelp, especially higher up.
Yeah, awesome. And then I think, let me check. This is the last image. Now, I saved this one for last because this thing is crazy good. I have no idea what this is. It doesn't look like it's from this planet.
Yeah.
I've got to guess this is a tiny, tiny creature. And is it living on another fish or another animal?
So fun fact, this too is a sheephead.
No.
This is one of the subjects that got me hooked into underwater photography. This is a nudibranch. It's a type of undersea sea slug. Nudibranch is Latin for naked lungs, and it breathes. You can see not in this particular image, but in this type of critter, their branchial plume is outside of its body. So again, naked lungs. So nudibranch. And this is one of the 130 species that live off the coast of Southern California. And this is arguably the most beautiful and the most common. This is I'm gonna say it's a Flabellina iodinea, which is its scientific name, better known as a Spanish shawl. And actually, I think the scientific name has been changed, but I haven't updated it. I'm sure you might get a comment in there. Someone who's hardcore. But anyway, this Spanish shawl is maybe an inch or two long, right? And I was able to capture this one on the nematocyst, or the floating, the ball structure of the giant kelp. And that's the blade of the giant kelp kind of in the back of that image. That's where the back of its body is it's crawling down over this nematocyst, and which makes a perfect stage for macro photography, for lighting. There's no special effects here. I barely edited this image.
Wow.
And the reason I think this particular nudie pops so much is because that kelp, as I mentioned before, absorbs so much light. It's almost like a photographer's dream, because you can really just focus on lighting the subject, and that kelp is going to absorb the light and then give center stage to the subject.
Yeah.
Right.
Unbelievable.
So yeah, I was lucky to get it. The eye, it's like an eye spot, just razor sharp, and the rhinophores, or those two like antenna-looking structures, just razor sharp. And underwater photographers out there, that's really what you're going for. Just like the eye of a bird, right, or any other creatures, you want to really get that eye spot, and those rhinophores like tack sharp.
Do you know the focal length of this?
Yeah, 105.
Okay.
I'm shooting a 105 macro lens Nikon.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Wow.
I'm shooting at f/16.
Okay. And what
body was I using? It was a D810. Yeah, a D810. So full frame.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about this is that the contrast between the purple and that orange and yellow, and then also balanced with the orange and yellow on the back, like it's really, from a color standpoint, it's just absolutely spectacular.
Yeah,
that's my favorite.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
I saved that one to the end. That's my favorite.
Yeah, thank you. And I just get with the black background. We talked about this before. With shutter speed, you can just dial that shutter speed all the way up to the limiting factor of your strobes, At this case, 1/200th of a second, and with a macro lens, that's enough to block out all ambient light and get nice black background
Wow,
against
really,
open
really
water.
impressive. So, just a few questions for you
Okay.
personally. Bucket list. I always like to
Hmm.
get into bit like if you could go anywhere this week or next week, like is there any place you haven't been that you are just like I have to shoot this species or this location?
Hmm. To be honest with you, I can't name anything specifically. What I'm kind of, my kids are getting a little bit older to the point where they can start scuba diving, Scott. So I'm just excited to share with them what I've already experienced. Like I love, love, love the Solomon Islands. So much of that is pristine and untouched, and the corals are amazing. I'm just eager to get them in the water and share with them the experiences I've been so fortunate to have over the last
Yeah,
couple of years.
that's
Um,
amazing.
Maybe get in the water with orcas, like go to a dedicated orca trip. Um, I think Matt Sullivan's going up to a resort in Vancouver, BC, in Canada called God's Pocket, where everything is just massive. The water there is so cold and rich with nutrients that everything just grows on a scale that is, mind blowing from what I've seen. And I guess I would love to get up there. Yeah.
Okay. Now, a couple questions came in. Do you ever shoot at night? So I guess that
Yeah,
would be you.
occasionally.
Okay.
It's a little bit tougher because not as many critters are out. I guess certain critters do come out, but not always. I'm very mindful of the environment in which I'm diving, and it's tougher for me to be aware of where my fins are. I certainly don't want to hit any, especially if I'm in the tropics, coral structures that have taken
Yep.
thousands of years to grow. One mistake, can snap off a branch that took, really long time to grow. So for that reason, I usually don't dive and shoot at night.
Okay, I'm going to get really scientific now. So
Okay.
hopefully you've studied a little bit. The little shiny critters that come out. So these are like jellyfish looking things with lights in them.
Oh,
Do you know?
the little translucent, like the comb jellies.
Yeah, what have you ever shot these things? And is this, I've
Yeah,
seen them.
yeah.
So is that, do they come out at night only, or is that a deeper, uh, like a deeper living species?
Well, it depends. I mean, the
All
jellies are
different.
kind of everywhere, right? And they just kind of go as the currents go. You probably see them more often at night because you're laser focused. You can only see what your light sees.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then they just kind of pop because their cilias are moving, and it gives that nice rainbow effect. And you probably don't see them in the day as easily because they're competing with the sun, right? In terms of translucency of those critters. So
So
you probably just see
Stacy,
them easier at night. That's probably it.
yeah, Stacy, who's much smarter than me, mentioned the term bioluminescent creatures. So
Oh,
this
bioluminescent
may
creatures.
be the word I
Okay.
was looking for. I don't know.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, once in a while, probably on most night dives, if you wave your hand really quick, you can see all the critters light up.
Okay, all right.
I
I
don't know
think
what they are,
yeah, I don't know anything about this stuff.
diatoms or something.
Scariest moment underwater. Do you have a moment that you were maybe a little frightened of? Either you were in a spot that wasn't really safe, or those orcas would have scared the bejesus out of me. So was there a moment with the orcas, or were you just so like fixated that it could? I'm not even thinking fear. I'm just thinking this is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, the heart was beating through the chest with the orcas because anticipation was a big part of that. I just didn't want to screw up the encounter because I knew it was going to be a one-shot,
Right.
thing. I would say scariest moment underwater. It wasn't when I was photographing. Back in the day, I used to lobster dive here in Southern California at night. And the first time I saw a bat ray, we saw an image of that one of those earlier,
Yes.
was there. And they have that reflective eye like a deer.
Okay.
And the visibility this night was maybe 5 feet. I'm just looking for lobsters to put in my bag. And I had never seen a bat ray before in my life. And I'm looking around my dive buddy. I lost my dive buddy, so it's creepy. It's pitch black, and I kind of shine my light over in one direction, and I see this giant eyeball, maybe 3 feet away from me, and then it decides to take off right at me and go right over my head. So that was kind of a freaky moment. I got
Are
over
there
it pretty quickly, but it's a big critter.
are
Maybe
there
a
race
5 foot
species that
wingspan.
are some of those race species dangerous?
No,
Okay.
just don't step on them. They'll
Okay.
leave you alone.
I didn't know if there was something with the tail, like that you have to watch out for. No, okay. And then one last one. Oh, your gear. How do you keep it? Do you tether it to yourself, or have you ever heard of somebody dropping their gear?
I've had a housing almost land on me once because when the crew from the boat was handing it to the diver didn't catch it, and an entire rig about this size just kind of landed nice and softly,
Yeah.
like right in front of me.
But
And
do
I
you
kind of look
tether?
up and I'm
Do you?
like, oh, okay, someone's missing their housing. So I snapped it to my BC to my vest and brought it up with me when I finished my dive. But I don't
So is
tether
that
my gear
housing
to me,
tethered
with
to
the
you?
exception of a trip like Tonga, where like you could be like in 2,000 feet of water. If I know I'm in water that deep, it's usually when I'm free diving. I'll have like a little wrist lanyard,
Okay.
you know, but otherwise no.
And what about sharks? Any encounters with sharks? Pictures of sharks?
Sure.
Is it a subject you like?
Yeah, I love sharks. I mean, I've never seen a great white underwater. I'm sure they've seen me, but I've never seen them. I'd love to be honest with you. I've heard they're out at the oil rigs. That would be an amazing photo op. And they're probably out there hunting sea lions or something. I've encountered some hammerheads in San Diego. There's a lot of sharks that live on the sea floor, horn sharks, wall sharks, seen nurse sharks, etc. And then in the Indo Pacific area, you have your black tips and your reef sharks, and they're amazing to see. They're more skittish of us than we are could be of them. Guarantee it. They never get close enough to get a good image.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. I think we're kind of wrapping up here. So a
Okay.
couple things we didn't mention it so far, but just out of curiosity, you mentioned that you do, and feel free to, if you've got anything you want to plug or talk about, you mentioned you run some workshops.
Yeah, Todd and I have been working some. We don't have any on the books now.
Okay.
So to be honest with you, nothing to plug.
Okay.
Locally, although for your viewers out there, feel free to hit me up on Instagram if you have any other questions, or go through Scott. And
And in the description of the video today, I'll put the any website information that you have, including any of the like if somebody's has a curiosity about this and would like to reach out to you, I'll put your Instagram handle on there. But we'll also put any link to workshop information in the future that you're doing. I'll try to get that updated as well. And then you do work full time, so this isn't your career. You don't. This isn't your full-time career, I should say. So this is a kind of like many of us, we get our healthcare coverage and we pay the rent with one income, and then maybe we try to supplement it on the side, or we just do it because we love it.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate enough that this pays for itself. I'm exclusive contributor to Getty Images, and so luckily I have a large portfolio on Getty. And then once in a while, I'll be invited to be a photo pro on a local dive charter, and I'll get a trip out of that. So I'm very fortunate to have that outreach and be a part of the community that kind of supports my work.
I've got this is a critical question that somebody just brought up.
Uh-oh.
Back button focus.
Yes.
Do you use back button focus?
I am 100% dedicated to back button focus.
Oh, God,
Who asked that question?
So it's a running joke on the show. I'm one of the few people apparently that doesn't. So I need to now update the back button focus chart. I'm now in the small minority. Michael Zeigler goes into the chart.
Yes.
And we are now at 9 guests, 8 guest back button focus, and only 4 shutter release.
I am a huge fan of BBF. I could be the president of the BBF fan club. I can't believe. Have you tried it?
I tried it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I need my thumb. I need my thumb to change your shutters. I'm not going to get into it. I made a video on it. I'll send you the link. Can't do it. Tried it for a long time. Now I will tell you, I was doing a video today. It's kind of like a cold weather series that I'm going to do in the future. And I have this like kind of hacky thing that I'm doing for cold weather. But in this hack, this photography hack for cold weather, I did use back button focus this morning because there's in cold weather with 2 sets of gloves on, it's actually really hard to find the shutter the way they're designed with thick gloves on. So I have a hack about that. But so I did have to use back button focus this morning. Man, I was hoping I'm actually only booking people from now on that do not use back button focus, just so I can catch up.
They're gonna be harder,
just so I
harder
can
to
catch
find.
up. I got to catch up. It's like literally me and 3 other people, and I've had like 8 or 9 that use back button focus. So
Yeah, you got to listen. Just set it in AFC, back button focus. Your life is going to be so much easier. Just trust me.
I just assumed with underwater housing you couldn't even do it. I just figured there was only like one giant shutter release button.
There's a dedicated trigger right here for back button focus.
Oh God, you're
I
killing
teach it in
me.
all the workshops. A huge fan because again, you're underwater. You've got gloves on or dry gloves. It's hard to feel that trigger, right?
That's awesome. Hey, listen, this was a great show. I had a little bit of technical issues in there in the middle with audio, but I think we got it ironed out for the end, and I'm so happy. Really, really, just I love your work. I love your underwater work. Super guy, did great on the show. I think everybody would acknowledge that. And thank you so much for being on. I'm going to just go ahead and sign off. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to run a little promotion here. So just hang on. I'm going to chat with you after the show. So if you could just sit there on mute for about a minute, I'm going to say goodbye to everybody that jumped in today. And thank you for jumping on. As always, your live show participation is a huge part of the show. That's why I continue to do it live. So thank you so much again for jumping in. Thanks to Michael for taking time out of his day and stopping in and it was fascinating. I think we could probably do another episode easily down the road because, there's so many questions that I have just about the technical parts of it. So you never know, Michael, maybe we'll have you back on the show. So I'm going to play a little outro. Thanks everybody again for stopping in and have a great night. Hey, thanks for tuning in to another live episode. If you're not a subscriber, make sure you hit the subscription button now and definitely hit the like button. If you enjoy the content here, you're also going to want to check out my Patreon site. There, I take you behind the scenes and in the field. I offer editing tips in Lightroom and Photoshop specifically for wildlife. And I also have exclusive episodes that are archived only on Patreon. You can also find me on social media across the board at SKeysImages. Hey, thanks for your ongoing support. And I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.